Oh no, they were unidentified. You mean aliens are real? You've just changed my life. No! Stop! Goodness, even I regret critiquing this video at this point. Hey guys, Magic Skeptic here, aka Magic Dara, and you are all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So before I jump into the video today, guys, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for making me a part of your day. You didn't have to click in this video, but you did. So thank you for doing that. And, you know, while you're here, if it is indeed your first visit to my channel, please do consider hitting that like button. I don't, at the time of recording, have a Patreon or any other form of financial support in the work that I do in this channel. And so I would appreciate it as a very small favor for me if you would hit that like button. Consider it a kind of payment which costs you nothing and gives me more help than you could ever possibly imagine. So thank you. With that addressed, let's move on to the topic of today's video, and that is aliens. I've probably dated myself with that reference. You know what? I'm not going to even name what that's from. If you know it, you know it. And if you don't, you were probably born in the year 2000 or something after that. I was born in 91, so I am a 90s child. And so anyway, with that addressed, let's jump into this topic, guys. It's a big one, right? And of late, it seems to have kind of risen to prominence once again. This whole conversation about UFOs and aliens and are we alone in the universe has come to the forefront because various government agencies have been essentially acknowledging the existence of unidentified flying objects. Emphasis on the word unidentified there, which is going to form a crucial part of this video.
Well, the U.S. government has released an eagerly awaited report on unidentified flying objects. The federal government is unable to explain as many as 143 objects encountered by military aircraft in the last several decades.
The real evidence, like the video of that thing, whatever the fuck that Tic Tac was, taking off at what they estimate to be thousands of miles an hour instantaneously from a standstill. The coordinates that the jets had where they were supposed to scramble to doing this exercise, this fucking Tic Tac went to that spot, almost like to tell you, hey bitch, I know where you're going. It went from, they tracked it on radar going from 80,000 feet above sea level to 50 in less than a second.
Well, when I look at these things, a lot of these people, I believe these people. And especially watching that documentary, Joe, it was a real mindfuck. And a lot of this is bone chilling because I believe, especially when 62 people see something or 200 people in Melbourne, Australia, or all of these high-level military people who you could tell are scared shitless recounting what they saw, I believe them. I really do, because it's hard to act, right?
But before we jump into today's critique, I want to address two things, 2 points of clarity, if you will. The first of which is the word fallacy. I use the word fallacy quite a lot on this channel, and I don't think I've taken the time to define it on too many occasions. So just for today, just to make sure that we are all on the same page here, I'm going to begin by defining that word. So what is a fallacy, guys? A fallacy is a mistake in an argument that makes the conclusion invalid. In other words, guys, if there's a fallacy to be found in your argument, whatever the conclusion of that argument is, however benign, that conclusion cannot be trusted because the fallacy renders that conclusion invalid. Simple examples include things like, you know, if I proposed something, never mind what that thing is, if I said X is true, whatever X is, and then my reasoning for X being true was something like, well, of course it's true. Everybody agrees with me. You can see that that is a fallacy, I hope. That's called the fallacy of consensus. It is the mistaken assumption that the consensus has something to do with the truth. And if you know anything about truth, you know that the consensus has absolutely no relationship to the truth at all. The vast majority of the planet used to believe that the Earth was flat, and obviously they were wrong, and it didn't matter that the majority of people believed it. They were mistaken. Now, could the majority be correct on an actual question or a topic? Of course they could, but they wouldn't be right because they're in the majority. They would be right because the evidence supports their conclusion. Another good example of a fallacy is, again, X is true, and then my reasoning for justifying the truth of X is something like, of course it's true. This very smart, educated person agrees with me. So you'll see this, religious people do this sometimes. They'll pick out a famous scientist, Francis Collins, who famously was responsible or a key figure in mapping the human genome, one of the most significant scientific advances of our time. Well, he's an evangelical Christian, and Christians will often cite him as such, and they will say, well, of course there's good reason to believe in God. Even Francis Collins, the guy who was largely responsible for mapping the human genome, even he's a Christian, right? And of course, that's a fallacy. And this is the fallacy of authority. It is appealing to authority figures. So, of course, I'm right. This very smart or educated person agrees with me. Surprisingly or shockingly, perhaps to some of you, the truth has no connection to authority. An authority figure can say that something is true, and that doesn't make it as such. Very, very clever people can believe very, very silly things. And in fact, to take the Francis Collins example, I don't think Francis Collins' reasoning for becoming a born-again Christian is very good. If you read his story, Francis Collins was walking in the woods one day, and he happened across a waterfall that had frozen into 3 separate streams. And in that moment, Francis Collins dropped to his knees and declared his love for Jesus Christ, because he believed that the 3 streams was a representation of the Trinity, right? I say to that, why didn't Francis Collins drop to his knees and declare himself a lover of Brahman, the divine figure of Hinduism, or the Trimurti of Hinduism, of which there are 3 characters? Again, 3 is a significant number in various religions, so it does make one wonder why Francis Collins dropped to his knees and accepted Christ. One can't help but wonder if Francis Collins' immediate cultural and civilizational circumstance had something to do with this conversion. Suffice to say, Francis Collins' intelligence in the scientific domain hasn't, in my view, kind of cross-pollinated with his theological assumptions and ideas. I don't think that because Francis Collins is smart in the scientific domain, that means he's smart in the theological domain, because as I've already inferred, his reasoning for accepting Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior leaves a lot to be desired. Suffice to say, it is a fallacy to appeal to authority. So, now that we understand what a fallacy is, I want to address a specific fallacy that's going to come up in this video quite a few times. And rather than having to explain it time and again, I'm going to explain it now so that I can refer back to this point in the conversation and save time later on when we're critiquing the video that we're going to critique here. And the fallacy I want to discuss is the argument from ignorance fallacy. This comes up all the time, and it has been a prominent discussion point in many of my previous videos. But again, just for clarity, and this might be our first video, I'm going to briefly explain it here before we jump into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation. The argument from ignorance fallacy is when somebody assumes the truth of their conclusion because they cannot think of a better explanation. And this comes up all the time. And as soon as you're aware of it, what you'll realize is that people deploy this all the time. So a good example is when somebody hears something go bump in the night in a house. They hear a creak upstairs or something. If somebody is more supernaturally minded, I would say, if they're a less skeptical individual, right? If such a person hears such a creak, what they might say is, oh my God, the house is haunted. And when you, as a skeptical individual, and if you're a viewer of my channel, chances are you are such an individual, when you point out as a skeptic to this person, well, there are many possible explanations for that bump. That occurred in the night. It could have been the wind. It could have been whatever, right? Now, let's imagine we rule out the wind. All the windows were closed. And you eventually get to the point where you have to admit, I don't know what caused something to go bump in the night. That's when your believer in the ghost or the haunting will suggest, see, you don't know. It must have been ghosts. Because you can't explain it, my hypothesis must be correct. But that's a nonsense, because they haven't provided any evidence for it being a ghost either. It being unexplained is not evidence for the supernatural. An event being unexplained is not evidence for anything. An event being unexplained is an event being unexplained. And the bitter pill to swallow there, which is something that we don't readily accept as human beings, is that the most honest answer when there's no evidence on a particular question is to say, I don't know. But of course, as I've already alluded to, human beings don't like that answer because we're curious and we like answers. We like answers so much that we will very often accept a bad answer as opposed to admitting that we don't know. And so that is an argument from ignorance. It's when somebody doesn't know any better, so they assume the truth of the conclusion that they've already formed in their mind. I won't give you another example because we're about to encounter several. So I was exploring YouTube recently and I encountered a channel called You Curious. And I must admit, it's an awesome channel and I'm going to include the link in the description down below. I highly recommend that you check out their content. It's just amazing. Such great production values, fascinating content and so forth. But one video stuck out, and considering that Halloween is coming up and all the rest of it, I thought it might be rather fitting, if only seasonal, that I address the existence of aliens. And that brings us to the video that I found on their channel. And the video was titled, Top 10 Evidence That Aliens Exist. And so I thought, wow, what a lovely topic to sink my skeptical teeth into. And I have watched this video in advance, and so I'm going to warn you, this evidence, if you are like-minded, is pretty uncompelling. The problem is that people who lack in, skepticism are probably going to find some of these alleged pieces of evidence rather persuasive. And, when you meet people who claim to believe in aliens, these are precisely the pieces of evidence that they cite. And so I think it's important that I address it. I think it's important that people like you and I do our best to counter this flawed and irrational thinking, because the more flawed and irrational thinking that persists, then the more we're going to have to live in a world alongside people who believe bad ideas. And those bad ideas, as I've explained elsewhere, can lead to terrible outcomes, right? And so let's dive into this video together and explore this supposedly awesome evidence for the existence of aliens and figure out if indeed it's very compelling. And, spoiler alert, it's not. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive right in. Let's watch it together, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's go.
Our planet Earth is a beautiful example of life. We have humans, animals, reptiles, insects, and plants. Do you think there's any other planet like ours that has life? Do you think aliens exist? Welcome to You Curious, and today we'll be looking at the top pieces of evidence that prove aliens exist.
So straight away we're off to an interesting start, and in my view, two arguably separate questions have been conflated here. The question as to whether or not there's life on another planet, in my view, is rather distinct from the question as to whether or not alien life has visited our planet in flying objects and flying saucers, little green men and the like. These two questions, in my view, there's a gulf between them. So the idea that there's life elsewhere in the universe is not very controversial to me. Now, we currently, at the time of recording, don't have evidence of life on any other planet, but that's because space is just so incredibly vast that it's incomprehensible. And that's kind of the point, really. We do know that the chemicals and the the elements that make up life on our planet are rather common in the cosmos. And so given the commonality of those ingredients and given the sheer size of our universe, it stands to reason that there's a Goldilocks zone elsewhere in the universe, elsewhere in the cosmos, that may have resulted in the proliferation of some kind of life. Now, the odds that it's going to be similar to our own are, I don't know how to assess those odds. It could be the case that there are humanoid, thinking, conscious creatures elsewhere in the universe. That could absolutely be the case. But I don't know how we assess the probability there. But the likelihood that there's some kind of life, that there might be an amoeba somewhere 10 million light years away or something, that doesn't strike me as a particularly controversial idea, albeit I don't believe that it's true right now because there's no evidence for it being true. But in terms of probability, given the commonality of those ingredients I've already discussed and given the size of the universe, it's not surprising to me. It won't be surprising to me if we discover bacterial or some kind of small microscopic life form or flora or fauna somewhere. I don't know. It just hasn't been discovered yet, right? So that's one question, and perhaps we'll all more or less agree on that there's probably a likelihood that there's life somewhere in the vastness of this cosmos. But again, that is very distinct from the question, has alien life visited this planet? Complex, conscious life that flies aircraft and abducts human beings and experiments on us and so forth. And so I just wanted to address that before we go any further, because there is a conflation of two questions there, and I think it's essential that we delineate between them. So with that delineation pointed out and that flag planted in the sand, let's continue.
10. Ancient evidence of aliens in cave paintings. The 10,000-year-old rock paintings found in the Karama region of India depict spooky, faceless aliens and an antennaed object that looks just like what we now see as a UFO.
I have to say, if this is the compelling evidence that this video is referring to, then we're not going to get very far here, are we? So, yeah, sure, there are many civilizations that have cave drawings and hieroglyphs and various art forms, if you will, illustrations that include spooky creatures and beings and things flying, and, you know, you can call it a craft and you can call them aliens all you like. But at the end of the day, these are illustrations that civilizations that have long since died out created and put on walls and on canvases and on stone and what have you. This is not evidence of any alien visitation. This is perfectly understandable without appealing to extraterrestrial explanations, right? Why couldn't it be the case that this was an ancient form of storytelling, right? Maybe the people who drew these and created these illustrations were merely telling ghost stories, stories about aliens and monsters and ghouls and goblins to their people. We know that the ability to read is a relatively recent ability of humanity, right? If you go into prehistory, you're looking at civilizations that did not use the written word. They spoke to one another. They had oral traditions and they communicated using imagery and so forth. And so it's not surprising that we would find such pictures and fantastical images and illustrations, because that's how these people told stories. Why is it that we have to use this as evidence for aliens, as evidence for extraterrestrial visitation? That is a gigantic leap. And even if you could prove, which you can't, but even if you could prove that these illustrations were created with the intent of conveying actual historical events, actual historical extraterrestrial visitations, you still wouldn't have proved that said visitations occurred. All you would have proven, if you had proved anything at all, is that our ancestors believed that they had been visited by extraterrestrials. And the fact that they believed it doesn't make it true. The fact that they believed it just means that they believed it, and they were perhaps, in my view, I would be leaning in this direction, that our ancestors were simply under a misapprehension. Our ancestors believed that lightning was the anger of the gods. Our ancestors believed that the earth was flat. And so it's not surprising to me that our ancestors might have believed one other ridiculous thing, that being that aliens visited them and that they created illustrations depicting that alleged fact. But this is not compelling. People can be under misapprehensions. These supposed visitations might be best explained by hallucination. They might be best explained by some kind of misunderstanding that occurred in reality, like a mirage or something. But, the point is that even if I don't have another explanation that I can insert, and I don't, by the way, if indeed it could be proven, which it hasn't, if indeed it could be proven that these illustrations and glyphs have been created to depict actual historical extraterrestrial visitations, even if I don't have an explanation for why these people are making these claims, it would still be the case that the most honest answer in that moment is, I don't know why they're making these claims. And you don't know either. So again, guys, you just don't get to use historical glyphs and illustrations as evidence for extraterrestrials. And if you do, be prepared to have your claim rejected by skeptical people such as myself.
9. The UFO painting and art history aliens. During the Renaissance, eerie UFO shapes popped up in works of art on several occasions. This is the Madonna with St. Giovannini, also known as the UFO painting, most likely painted by Italian Renaissance artist Domenico Ghirlandaio from around the 15th century.
So everything I said for point 10 is identical for point 9, so I won't repeat it all here. Suffice to say, the fact that supposedly extraterrestrial beings appear in Renaissance artworks is not compelling. Even if these appearances in the artwork are intended to be a historical record of alleged visitations, that wouldn't mean that said visitations occurred. The artist might be under a misapprehension, the artist might be out of their mind, they might be suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy. There's all sorts of possible explanations as to why an artist puts something in a painting. It could also just be for fun. I'm not going to waste any more time on this. This illustration and artwork point is moot, and it should be treated as such. Moving on.
8. The Nazca Lines. The Nazca Lines, located in southern Peru, are a collection of over 10,000 lines etched into desert sands. They form around 300 geoglyphs of various images depicting animals, figures, and plants. What's truly incredible about those geoglyphs is their sheer scale, some of which stretch over more than 9 kilometers and measure 30 meters wide. Due to their sheer scale, many consider that these Nazca Lines must have been created from an aerial point of view, insinuating that aliens must have been responsible.
And our old friend finally enters the conversation. This is a big fat argument from ignorance. So, geoglyphs. Yes, they are incredibly impressive. But the speaker in the video, the narrator, says that they're so precise and so amazing that they must have been created from an aerial perspective. Must. That is the word you must look out for, because it is very often a clue that somebody is constructing an argument from ignorance. Translated, what this claim means, or what it translates into, if you will, is that the author of this video and many others cannot think of a better explanation for how these glyphs were created. Therefore, they must have been created from an aerial perspective. That is a black and white argument from ignorance fallacy. It is textbook. You could not get any more clear, right? And for that reason, I cannot take the conclusion seriously. Right? Yeah, if you want to say that it must have been created from an aerial perspective, have at it, Haas, but I just don't agree with you. I'm happy to say I don't know how they did it, because none of those people who created those geoglyphs are around to ask. I'm happy to say, you know what, I don't really get it. And I haven't researched geoglyphs. If I look into it, there might very well be very good explanations that historians have come up with, but I don't even need to go that far. All I need to know is that when you say it must have been created from an aerial perspective, you are engaged in an argument from ignorance fallacy. And so I cannot even trust your conclusion that they were created from an aerial perspective, because all you're really saying is you can't think of a better explanation. And we haven't even gotten to the next little nugget that you added. It must have been created from an aerial perspective, therefore aliens. How the hell did you get that far? Even if I conceded that they must have been created from an aerial perspective, which I haven't conceded. But even if I conceded that much, let's imagine you had compelling evidence, which you don't, that they were created from an aerial perspective. Even then, I wouldn't be justified in accepting your aliens claim, because we could insert any mystery here, right? It must have been created from an aerial perspective. Therefore, God helped them. God dictated to them because God can see from above. That's just as good an explanation as your aliens explanation. Also, it was created from above, therefore time travel. Somebody from the future with a helicopter went back in time and flew above and dictated where to put the drawings to create the geoglyph. You see, we can insert any ridiculous explanation here. Any ridiculous explanation at all. That's where arguments from ignorance get you. Nowhere. Precisely nowhere. So, coming full crop circle. I didn't write that. I swear that was spur of the moment. We're coming to crop circles in a moment. I should have saved it for then. Damn. Anyway, coming full circle, no. I'm happy to say I don't know how they created these geoglyphs. And the fact that we don't know is not evidence that it was done aerially. And the fact that we don't know is not evidence that aliens were involved. Just stop it, please.
7. Crop circles. We've all heard of crop circles, and most would consider them to be a pretty modern phenomenon. However, the first publicly recorded crop circle was way back in 1678 in Scotland, which came to be known as the Devil's Circle. Crop circles are often large and complicated in their design, and they tend to be found in fields of wheat or corn where the stalks are bent into sophisticated shapes.
And we arrive at crop circles. It was going to come up at one point or another. And so, yeah, I just have to say that I find this completely uncompelling. I mean, isn't it funny that the evidence that is marshalled in favour of aliens is always, or very often, a phenomenon that can be replicated by human beings? So, glyphs, as we just discussed, can be created by human beings, and suddenly that's evidence for aliens. Crop circles can be created by human beings. Suddenly that's evidence for aliens. You know, if they were able to identify a phenomenon that couldn't have been achieved by human beings, then we would have a more interesting mystery. And still, however, it would just be a more interesting mystery. It wouldn't be evidence of aliens, but at least then we'd have something interesting to talk about. I have to be brutally honest and admit to you that I find the conversation about crop circles just utterly dull, boring, and uninteresting. So I'm not going to waste any more time on it here. Suffice to say, crop circles are not compelling evidence of alien visitation. And the fact that so many of them have been proven to be fraudulent just makes my case for me. But even if you find examples, and you will, that are unexplained, where we cannot identify a human culprit, that doesn't mean that aliens are responsible. Again, all we would have there is an unexplained phenomena, and for you to say therefore aliens, you would be committing the exact same argument from ignorance that was committed in relation to geoglyphs.
6. Foo Fighters. No, not the band. Surely you must have wondered where they got their name from, right? Well, Foo Fighter was a term used by Allied aircraft pilots during World War II to describe strange aerial sightings believed to be UFOs in various accounts. They were described as glowing fiery lights speeding through the air, or sometimes quite close to the ground. Researchers have suggested that Foo Fighters can be explained as electrostatic or electromagnetic phenomena. However, there are no conclusive accounts as to what these sightings were, and the cases remain a mystery to the present day.
I think you know what I'm going to say already. This is just another big fat argument from ignorance. Unexplained phenomena, therefore aliens. Who cares? Seriously, who cares? The fact that something is unexplained means that the conversation is over. That's it. I'm not saying that the investigation is over. Very smart people with very fancy degrees are investigating this stuff, and good for them. And as soon as they come up with an explanation that is supported by evidence and reason, then I'll listen. But until then, this is a big fat nothing burger. This is a conversation about unexplained events, and as conspiratorially minded people often do, if something is unexplained, it must be something to do with the woogie 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 woogie. Right? It's going to be aliens, or it's going to be a government conspiracy, or it's going to be the lizard people, and just spare me. I'm sorry, guys, but yeah, you're not going to find any compelling evidence on this list, not if this entry is anything to go by. But let's move on.
5. Physical evidence. There are such things as trace cases or close encounters of the second kind, what's defined in UFOlogy as instances where there is physical interaction with a UFO. This might be a landing mark, damaged vegetation, or weird residues. There are somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 trace cases. As with anything UFO related, often these trace cases can be debunked as hoaxes, but some, to this day, still prove very difficult to explain.
And the ones that prove difficult to explain are the ones that are unexplained. Jesus Christ, how many times are you going to make the same mistake over and over again? An unexplained event is not evidence for your bias. An unexplained event is not evidence for aliens. It is evidence for exactly nothing. Again, the argument from ignorance rears its ugly head. I apologize to you, dear listener, for the repetition in this particular video, but it just so happens that the argument from ignorance fallacy is one that is repeated frequently by purveyors of nonsensical and bad ideas. Let's continue.
4. Project Sign. Project Sign was an official study under the United States Air Force put in place to investigate UFOs. It ran from 1948 to 1949, but was kept secret for years. The investigations undertaken by the project were intended to debunk speculations that UFOs had extraterrestrial origins. But of the nearly 13,000 sightings that were studied, 701 of them simply couldn't be chalked up to weird weather or man-made objects. In the end, the government simply had to classify these as unidentified.
Oh no, they were unidentified. You mean aliens are real? You've just changed my life. No! Stop! Goodness, even I regret critiquing this video at this point. What are you talking about? 700 odd were unexplained? Oh dear. Call the president, because you've just changed the world. My ass, you've changed the world. This is nonsense. 13,000 cases, and they were able to successfully explain the vast majority. 700 and some change were left unexplained. And of course, the maker of this video has to cite that as evidence for extraterrestrials. What a load of garbage. This is just a hot mess. And just to be clear, I don't have any animosity towards the creator of this video or this channel. I already said I think it's a great channel. This is just a ridiculous video. And it contains within it ridiculous ideas. Ideas that are going to result in a certain percentage of the viewers coming away believing in this garbage. And I'm sorry guys, but this video has 805,000 views. 805,000 views. What percentage of the viewers of this video do you think came away more convinced in the existence of alien visitation? In other words, what percentage of people came away from this video having been dumbed down? Right? And all because of the ridiculous argumentation. And because these people who will have been convinced by it are just not philosophically minded and don't have the requisite training to recognize an argument from ignorance when they see one. Ironically, or you might argue rather fittingly, they are ignorant about arguments from ignorance. Goodness, it's just depressing. But let's just try and get to the end. There's not too many points left. Let's continue.
3. Area 51. Area 51 has been the subject of many conspiracy theories over the years, mainly due to the controlled secrecy surrounding it. It was used to design and build military fighter jets and drones. However, conspiracies still persist regarding its alleged use as an alien research center. But why Area 51? It would be of no surprise for any government to have a research center for extraterrestrial life, and the extremely controlled site in the Nevada desert makes it the perfect place for such alien research to happen.
It also makes it the perfect place to hide the evidence for the Loch Ness Monster. It also makes it the perfect place to hide evidence of Bigfoot. It makes it the perfect place to hide evidence of any ridiculous proposition that is evidentially bankrupt. So no, the fact that there's mystery surrounding Area 51 is not evidence of extraterrestrials. It simply isn't. But because we are humans and we are flawed, we don't know what's going on behind that wall. Must be aliens. Again, another argument from ignorance. We don't know what's going on over there. Must be supernatural. I can't explain that creaking noise upstairs. Must be ghosts. I can't explain that object flying in the sky. Must be aliens. I swear to God, if I could click my fingers to remove one flaw in the thinking of humanity, it would be this. It would be the removal of the tendency to make arguments from ignorance. If that cognitive flaw could be removed from humanity with a click of my fingers, the world would be infinitely better. There would be so much less babble and nonsense and hocus pocus. The world would have improved by an immeasurable amount overnight. But unfortunately, I can't click my fingers. All I can do, dear listener, is make videos like this and hope that as many people see it as possible. And thank you for joining me on this journey and watching this video so that it gets more notoriety and gets selected for more frequently by the YouTube algorithm. Because the more people that see this video, the better. Because the less people who believe this nonsense is obviously a good thing. And I don't think I need to explain to intelligent viewers such as yourselves why that would be a good thing. But let's move on.
2. Martians are our neighbours. When we think of aliens, very often we think of Martians, our nearby neighbours from the planet Mars. The main reason we look towards Mars for extraterrestrial life is because it's the closest to our own planet with a somewhat similar environment. The main similarity being that there was once water on Mars. Recent evidence shows that approximately 4.5 billion years ago, 1/5 of the planet was covered in water. In 2017, the Curiosity rover detected the presence of boron on Mars, and boron is something that's considered an essential ingredient for life.
So yeah, sure, Mars may very well have had life on it in the past. Now that hasn't been verified yet. What we've discovered, to my understanding, is that Mars may very well at one point been hospitable to life. But again, this comes back to the conflation of two questions that I addressed in the opening of the video. Even if we discover that there was life on Mars at one point in the past, that wouldn't prove at all any of the claims about UFOs or little green men visiting our planet and abducting people and creating crop circles and helping ancient civilizations create geoglyphs and all of that nonsense. It wouldn't do that at all. It's very likely that if we do discover that there was life on Mars, that life will have been rather simplistic. We might discover that there were microscopic bacteria on Mars, right? We might discover an amoeba existed on Mars, right? Again, none of it would demonstrate that any of the claims of the UFO people are correct, right? Any of the conspiracy theorists who allege that they were abducted by aliens and experimented upon and so forth. Give me a break. So, yeah, this is just another conflation. At the time of recording, there's still no evidence that there was life on Mars or any other planet for that matter. But should it come true, should we discover evidence of life on these planets, that will not be a debunking of this video. That won't be a confirmation of any of the bombastic claims that are being made in this video and that about crop circles and so forth and geoglyphs and, you know, abductions and all the rest of it. It won't be confirmation about any of that at all. And so, again, it's important that we delineate between those two questions. So let's move on to the final piece of evidence. Will this be the thing that convinces me? I doubt it.
1. The Drake equation. US astronomer Frank Drake developed an equation to estimate the number of planets that were capable of hosting life and also capable of communicating with us. In 1961, he put together this equation looking at 7 key factors, including how many stars have solar systems, the formation rate of those stars, the number of planets that could support life, and how many of those planets could form intelligent life. The figures used are debatable, but Drake calculated there to be approximately 10,000 possible intelligent species in our universe.
And on this final point, I don't have any disagreement at all. It might very well be the case that there is life on other planets, as I've already addressed. It just might be very simplistic life, or it might be life that's so radically different from what we understand on this planet that we might not even identify it as life to begin with, and it might take some experimentation to figure out that something is actually alive. I don't know. Suffice to say, this question is fully separable from the claims, again, of those who would allege that UFOs, or flying saucers to be more specific, have visited this planet and that little green men have abducted people and whatnot. So, yeah, I have no problem conceding and acknowledging that, given the vastness of the universe and how common the chemicals for life are, that there might very well be life on other planets. But again, that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not that life has visited us. But you know, guys, as bitter a pill as it might be to swallow, it might be the case that we are in fact alone in the universe. I refer, of course, to the Fermi paradox, where our planet has been around for about 4.5 billion years, and human beings have been around for about 200,000 years, 250,000 years at the largest estimates. And given the age of the universe that we have measured to be about 13 billion years old, 13.5, 13.6 billion years old, if there is life in the history of the cosmos, where is it? Why isn't it here? If indeed there are other civilizations that are so incredibly advanced that they have technology that would allow them to engage in interstellar travel, well then where are they? Where are the flying saucers? Where are the little green men visiting our planet? We haven't found evidence of any of it, which would seem to suggest that it might not be there, right? If indeed life is elsewhere in the universe, complex life that, say, a civilization began 1 billion years before we got going, and that civilization still exists, it would presumably have technology that is far and away more advanced than ours. They might have wormhole travel, or they might be able to travel at the speed of light, or what have you. And so where are they? Why aren't they here? And this is the question at the epicenter of the Fermi paradox. Given the age of the cosmos and how long we've been around, why haven't we been visited? And the fact that we haven't might suggest that we really are alone in the universe, which is just as compelling to me as the idea that we're not alone. Both answers are phenomenal and interesting and fascinating. If we're alone in the universe, that really does make us special in a way that doesn't require any religious jargon or theology. I don't need to believe that I was created in God's image to feel special. If we're alone in the universe, I would feel special by default, because conscious life emerged on one planet at one point in history only. That would be an incredible fact to behold. Equally, if we discover that there is in fact life elsewhere, that would be amazing as well. But if you are a believer in the idea that there is complex life that is technologically far more advanced than we are, where are they? Why aren't they here? Why haven't we met them? And of course, you could say that they're hiding, you could say that they haven't found us and all the rest of it. And you know, maybe you're right, but we're dealing firmly in the hypothetical here. But I just thought it might be worth finishing with the Fermi paradox, because it's not like the idea that life is elsewhere in the universe is just a dead certain conclusion. There is a debate worth having there. All I can say in closing is that there isn't any evidence of life elsewhere in the universe just yet. And until there is, I'm going to continue saying, I do not know. And anybody who tells you different is selling you a conspiracy theory. And that's it. They're selling you garbage, and they're likely using an argument from ignorance fallacy in order to marshal that garbage and throw it at you. And so I hope that this video was informative. I hope it has given you a better understanding of the argument from ignorance fallacy. And I hope it gives you the ability and equips you with the tools required in order to have this argument with people that you meet in the real world. albeit be very careful who you engage with, because the kind of people I've met in the past who believe this stuff, they're not the kind of people you want to have a debate with. And so I just want to give you a public safety warning there. But in any case, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do consider dropping a like. You have no idea how much that helps me out. And if you've been enjoying my content more generally, please do consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you do, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. So thank you again for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.